Hello, Podsmashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-bit Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer. We are your hosts.
Penguin and Termite.
You are Penguin. I am Termite. Sorry, because we do that so that you can distinguish our voices, and I ruined it. So
That's
you
fine.
are.
I am Penguin.
I am Termite. And we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games over a beer.
That's
Tonight,
right.
we, in this kind of pseudo E3 weird coronavirus COVID-19 era of the video game industry in 2020, are doing, we're in the E3 world, or what would normally have been E3, and that is the crazy announcements and the cool stuff that's coming out, and all the new technologies, and we want to discuss the Graphical Plateau.
That's right, because we're, again, at the cusp of a brand new video game generation, and so it's more relevant now than ever, because we are reaching the summit of that plateau, getting closer and closer to what is the limits of the human vision. And we've seen that with Unreal 5, the demo, so that kind of partially inspired this episode. But it's a conversation that's kind of come up on the podcast before, but I don't think we've dedicated an entire episode to it, so what better time than now? So I think this will be good, timely as well. So that's what we're talking about tonight. We'll dive into that a little bit later. But first, we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what are you drinking tonight, Termite?
I am drinking a Sequench Ale from Dogfish Head.
Oh, nice.
The Session Sour. I think I've had this on the show last week.
I think you had it last week, yeah.
Yep. So
nice.
I'm still working my way through them.
Nice. I'm drinking something new so I can talk about it. Yes. I am having, what's it called? Trogs Brewing. Yeah, Trogs Independent Brewing. And I'm having their Troganator.
Oh,
it
yeah,
is
that's a staple. Yeah.
Double bock beer. And let's see, does that say anything? Monks had fasting figured out. No food, no problem. Just drink a double bock. Thick and chewy, with intense notes of caramel chocolate and dried stone fruit. Nader, as we call him, serves as a tribute to this liquid bread style. It is pretty good. I like it. It's 8.2% alcohol. It's probably the primary reason I like it. But it's a beer that's right up my alley. It's kind of got it's German, very German kind of style beer. So it's kind of got a little bit of sweet notes to it. And but it's more of like a weedy taste, like a Belgian or whatever. Except not Belgian, German. So, right. But it's kind of that overall style of being, tasting like a kind of like a Blue Moon, but like stronger and sweet and a little bit sweeter. I like it a lot. It's very good.
Sweet. Yeah, I've had that before. They also make Mad Elf Ale, by the way.
Yep. Yep. It tastes a lot like Mad Elf Ale. I think they probably have the base recipes very similar because it tastes reminds me a lot of Mad Elf, like less Christmassy Mad Elf.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, I love Mad Elf. Sweet.
Cool. All right. Well, that moves us on to our first kind of section of the show where we will just kind of update you with the goings-ons in the world, a kind of newsy segment. And you got anything for us tonight, Termite?
Yes, EA announced a new Star Wars video game today.
All right.
Did you see
today?
The trailer? Yeah.
I thought I saw it ahead of time. Maybe I saw it maybe it leaked or something like the...
You saw probably the little teaser thing. It was something called Star Wars Maverick, and it was like this image that was leaked, and Maverick's actually the code name for the project that they officially announced today.
The Squadrons,
actually called Star Wars Squadrons.
Yeah,
I will read... go ahead.
A buddy of mine, Jonathan Tong, I knew him as Jonathan Guy back in the day, so that's still in my head, John Guy. Actually, nice. He was living at the place before I moved in the first time I moved out of the house. So like my first set of roommates, I was his predecessor. Anyways, or he was my predecessor, I suppose. Anyway, so shout out John if you're listening to this. He messaged us and said, "Hey, what do you guys think of this?" So that's how I kind of shot across my bow, and a reason why I watched the trailer. As of right now, it's like there's no gameplay. It was just a trailer. So I'm like, Star Wars, shooty, bang, bang, planes.
Yeah, I'll read. The Verge has a small little write-up that describes it. I'll just let them explain it to you. So it says, EA has announced a new Star Wars game, Star Wars Squadrons, a first-person space combat game that will have players flying the series' famous starfighters in head-to-head single-player and multiplayer battles. Developed by Motive Montreal, which previously contributed to both Battlefront 2 and Anthem, Squadrons will let players fly a variety of Star Wars ships, including the X-Wing, A-Wing, Y-Wing, U-Wing, TIE Fighter, TIE Interceptor, TIE Bomber, and TIE Reaper fighters. EA won't be revealing gameplay until the company's EA Play Live event on Thursday, so by the time this episode goes live, that will have already happened, but it promises a variety of multiplayer modes, including fleet battles, where the goal is to work with your teammates to destroy a capital ship, as well as more traditional dogfighting modes. So
cool. I would love to get me in an A-wing.
Yep. As I said on Facebook chat, this game is $40. I expect a very short campaign. If anything of value at all is there, it'd be tiny. And then mostly multiplayer stuff, like in the vein of Battlefield or Battlefront 2.
Yeah, for sure. Yep,
it's coming out October 2nd.
I would love for it to be like a fully fleshed out single player game with a slight multiplayer mode. But this is what, DICE? Is it DICE who did Battle? No.
Yes, Battlefield was made by DICE. This game is developed by Motive Montreal. Which contributed to Battlefront 2 and Anthem. Anthem was made by BioWare, but this is an EA published title, so whatever Motive Montreal's involvement with the development of those games are, it's all under the whole EA wing. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting you said you wanted like a full single player. This is the only bit of news, so I don't mind like talking a little bit about this.
I've got a little bit of news, so I don't want to spend too much time on Squadrons.
I think because EA has the Star Wars license, and we've had Battlefront in the past, and they just nailed it and knocked it out of the park with Jedi Fallen Order. I think Jedi Fallen Order is that single player experience, and they're going to like leverage that, maybe make a sequel to it, who knows, from Respawn. But this Star Wars Squadrons is being a $40 title is probably going to be another multiplayer heavy game in the vein of Battlefront 2. So instead of Battlefront 3, we got this. And it's like space combat multiplayer.
More
focused.
Emphasis on dogfighting.
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing. That's speculation, but it makes sense to me if you look at like EA and their portfolio of Star Wars games and how they want to spread out like what's single player heavy campaign, voice acting, animations, and versus like what's online deathmatch stuff.
Yeah. It's if it is that latter category, which it sounds like it is pretty heavily, I would be interested in playing it if someone else had a copy of it, but I wouldn't probably spend money on it myself. I just don't. That's not my kind of game these days. So that's totally fine. Not to yuck anybody's yum. If that's your thing, please by all means. I
want to see it. I want
Squadron it up. Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm with you there too. The only other bit of news that I had to bear was the PC Game Show, which is an event that usually happens during E3. It happened this past week.
Was Excel 2020 announced officially?
They did. The two major things that I saw were of note were they dropped early access on Torchlight 3 that night.
Ooh.
So Torchlight 3 is now playable on Steam, I believe, and then also coming to Steam that is now available on Steam is Persona 4 Golden. It has been released from the Vita, from the graveyard of the Vita.
That was announced a couple of days ago that was happening, but it's worth talking about now because you're capturing it on our weekly show here.
Yep. So it's it is. I mean, for our listeners, it's 2 weeks after we're even talking about this now, so they can play Persona 4 Golden now. It's notable because again, the game was previously locked to the Vita only. It was a Vita only game, so unless you had PlayStation's handheld, the Vita, you couldn't play it. But it like Persona 5 Royal is kind of a re-release of Persona 4 with I think additional content. Kind of like a definitive edition of the game. But yeah, so Persona 4 will end up coming up in one of our best games of all time episodes because it's on that list. So though I haven't played it myself, it is kind of in the back of my mind because I'm really enjoying Persona 5. So I'm like, maybe I should go back and play what is widely considered the best Persona game, which is 4. So
there is a PS2 port on the PlayStation 4. No, I'm sorry, PlayStation 3. It's not Golden, though. It's just the original Persona 4.
The original, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Golden is locked away on Vita, and now it's available on Steam. They need to port it to PS4
To PS4? Oh, 100%.
So I can get trophies,
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that.
But it's a murder mystery. Did you know that?
Yes, I did, which is intriguing because what for what I know about like both the gameplay and the kind of style and story of Persona 5, I'm like, oh man, this would be great as a murder mystery because again, you have all those like you can only do X amount of things per day. So like, do you advance your social status or do you like investigate the murder? Then and then with the story of like going into people's minds and stuff, and I'm interested to see how it plays out in that context as opposed to in Persona 5 where you're thieves stealing people's twisted desires. Yeah, there's so much potential. So I definitely want to play that at some point. It's on my like long list of like these are games I want to get to at some point before I die.
Yep.
But well, cool. All right. Anything else news wise, or can we move on to our next?
But if anyone in the audience has a PlayStation Vita that's collecting dust and wants to get rid of, I have Persona 4 Golden, I believe, digitally, and I would love a Vita, but I don't want to pay for it. So, if you just send me your Vita, that'd be great. DM me for my address.
DM me. All right. Well, we skipped favorite things for like 2 weeks in a row. So
doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Favorite
things is a segment of our show where we update you on the thing we're digging this week. We skipped it last week because it was one of the best games of all time. We were going part 2 and we wanted to just jump right into it, right? And then this week, or the previous week before that, was the week of the protest, the Black Lives Matter protest. So we didn't really find it tasteful to talk about our favorite things. So that gives you like 3 weeks of favorite things to potentially work with if you have something you wanted to share that far back. But what's your favorite thing this week?
I'm going to go with the most recent one, which is we are in Virginia. So we have our little phased approach to coming out of the pandemic's stay-at-home orders. And
okay,
so
really.
for the
Sorry.
first time,
can I pause real quick? I saw an article today that was just mint, and it was like city enters phase 4 of pretending like the coronavirus no longer is a problem.
Nice. Yeah.
So good. I'm like, yes, that is what's happening. So everyone's just like, what coronavirus? What? That was so last month.
Yep. We had
as they start oozing out of their nostrils and stuff. Coronavirus, what's that?
Yep. There is fear of a second wave. I mean, it's there.
No, it's happening. It's literally happening. We didn't get past the first wave. We're still dealing with the infections from the first wave. It's just not in the news anymore because more important things happened, which I understand. But it's like, can we revisit the fact that we shouldn't just be opening up the states? But they're not going to close again. It would be devastating for the economy. And so it seems like we're just going to go full bore headfirst into disaster. It's cool. It's fine. That's all. Leave it at that.
Giant bullet train on fire, about to explode, just going at full speed.
So coronavirus is not my favorite thing. But
So exercising our ability to meet in gatherings of 50 or less people or fewer people, and I was able to see friends for the first time in 3 months. Started with a trip to a brewery on Saturday, and then there was a follow-up kind of cookout at a friend's house yesterday on Sunday, and it was cool to see everybody again. And these were outside hangout, so we were trying to do the social distancing, and we didn't hang out in each other's houses, so it wasn't as weird as I would have thought it could be. Maybe because we didn't really do masks and things. But because we weren't inside, so
yeah, we were outside.
And
seems like outside, there's much science to support the fact that outside is more hostile to the coronavirus, so masks aren't as necessary. But
so that's my favorite thing. It was just super fun to see friends again and interact in ways that I haven't done in 3 months. Yep.
Well, that is tangentially related to my favorite thing because I was there at those hangouts. So
you were.
I feel like the history is repeating itself because I think a very similar sounding set of favorite things happened during our Memorial Day, like the podcast after Memorial Day, where you were like, oh, my favorite thing was hanging out together, and I was like, that's mine too, except a little bit more specific than that. So something similar. At the second hangout that you were talking about, the one where it was like actual families and all of our kids were running around and my son was our friends had a little blow up pool with like a slide and stuff. And my son was just like, this is where I belong. This is what I was made for. So he had fun in that. But my favorite thing specifically was our friend Colby. Shout out Colby. She made a mixed drink that was like pineapple juice, ginger beer, and rum. And oh my gosh, it was so good.
Yeah, it was delicious. Yep.
I'm all about the sweet, delicious, punchy mixed drinks. The more disguised that taste of alcohol is, the better. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the taste of alcohol. I love it in beer. Like, I want my beer to taste like alcohol. But when you're mixing, like having a mixed drink, the whole point is to disguise, like to make it taste like as much like juice as possible. And this stuff tastes just like
that's
gingery.
One way to look at it. Yes. She used.
Look, no, if I want to taste alcohol, if I like liquor, don't get me wrong, I like rum specifically. But if I want to taste liquor, I will just take a shot. So if I'm going to make a mixed drink, I want to taste the mixed. Well, then you have, you know what I mean?
The science behind it all is a little different. I mean, like old fashions are 99% bourbon with like a little bit of extra, just to kind of accentuate different types of flavors and like bring out background flavors and different textures.
I see what
and things.
You're saying. But then there's the
that's
whole
a little bit more refined.
But then there's the whole, like, the Long Island iced tea. The whole point is that you just mix these particular sets of liquors, and the whole point is that those liquors combined, it tastes like an iced tea. And,
and that is a thing.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, that's fine. Anyways, this was delicious. It was like pineapple, gingery, fizzy. was great. So
the goal was
cool.
to make a good drink with as few calories as possible. So it was like a craft ginger beer that was diet.
Yeah,
so
it had no carbs in
it
either. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. And then the juices, of course, are sugars in context of fruit juice, which is nowhere near as bad as like refined sugar or adding simple syrup to a drink.
Yeah.
So it was sweetened with, I think she had orange juice in it too. Orange juice, pineapple juice, ginger beer, calorie free, and then the rum. The rum was like a white rum, a three-star plantation rum, which is good. Quality. Quality rum.
It was awesome. A
notification went out. Someone bring rum, and I was like, "Oh, what kind would you like?" And so Termite hooked up the rum.
You did. I remember you hooked up the rum. Macy was like, we were on our way up when we got the text, and Macy was like, "Why don't we go ahead and get off on the exit? And if nobody responds by the time we like would be able to go to the ABC store, then." And we were seconds away from respond. Like you guys beat us by seconds. So I was pulling out my phone to respond. Hey, we'll get it. And then you guys said we got it. I was like, nice. Oh, okay. Nice.
Yep.
So, cool. Well, then that's favorite things, which moves us on to we're blasting through this podcast. I'm so proud of us. We wish we could do this every week.
Look at us roll.
That moves us on to our next segment, which is
Ba-boom.
Ba-boom. DLC.
Downloadable content.
Yeah, downloadable content is a segment of our show that is a discussion you wouldn't normally have about video games, or maybe you would. Maybe you have awesome friends, but it's just kind of a fun sub discussion. Has sometimes nothing to do with our main topic, and that is what tonight's DLC is. It has more to do with the time of year that we're in. So, inspired by the announcement season, we'll say. Normally we would say E3 season, but in this case there's no E3. So inspired by the fact that we are in the middle of video game announcement season, early summer, early June is always like, we don't have a lot coming out this summer, but here are all the things you can look forward to this fall and later, and especially this year with a console leap, a console generation upgrade. It is definitely, it's chock full of just news constantly, all the time. So I wanted to do a little DLC where we came up with the craziest, most completely unfounded announcement that you can think of, like something that would be happening right now in a parallel universe where like the Earth took a different turn at some point to make this crazy thing that's happening a reality. But again, it's not our reality, but it's a reality that's similar enough to ours that you can say things. So like, I think the example I gave to you was like Amazon just announced they're releasing a console, and they have pillaged like Naughty Dog from Sony, and they've pillaged Ninja Theory, and they're like, these are now Amazon exclusive studios, and our new console is coming out to compete with the PlayStation 5 or whatever, and the Xbox Series X, and it's like new. So something that's just like, it would never happen in our universe, but it is happening in some parallel universe right now.
Yes.
So do you have because I have mine, so I can go ahead and go.
I do have one.
Other than, okay, so if you have one, since I just dropped a example one, people don't want to hear my voice. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Elon Musk's SpaceX company has procured the technology to render 3D games in the cloud space, but not just cloud computing. It's space age. Like it's literally orbiting Earth on satellites.
Like satellites.
Super
satellites.
Yes.
Ooh.
Are beaming complete bandwidth that will support basically what Google Stadia is trying to do. They have mastered it, and it works amazingly well. So much so that Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo have all bought into their service, and there are no longer any more video game hardware boxes coming out. All you get is a SpaceX service that allows you to play every video game from all the major platforms, completely seamless, with no input lag.
What would the rendering be like though? Because there's already concerns with streaming where it's like the input has to go from your controller to some server somewhere over the internet and then back. It's like now you're going up to space. I suppose if you had a networked, like if they were networked well enough, then they would essentially be like crisscrossing.
Well, SpaceX has come up with the middle out compression algorithm.
Yeah.
And what that does is allows all of these inputs and rendering
frames
middle
to
out.
Be... I always think of Silicon Valley's
That's it. That's what I was making fun of. Yes.
Expression.
Yeah. Yep,
okay, I got you. Yep.
That is a complete reference to that.
Nice.
They've come up with a compression algorithm that takes all of the information necessary and it compresses it to a level unforeseen in technology. And so it completely eliminates input lag and allows the most advanced graphics to be rendered at ridiculously high frame rates and super high resolutions beamed down to your house or wherever
this
you
is,
are.
Again, this is fictional SpaceX. This is not.
Yes.
This is not.
It's
the way you said
reality.
it sounded like No, it's, the way you said it, you're like SpaceX has already perfected this, and I was like, what? Really? They've done? No. He's talking. He's talking.
This is the alternate reality that SpaceX has. Instead of going after putting consumer rockets where people can go into space, it's in helping the moon stuff. They've decided to switch to video games, and they've come up with this new technology. So in 2020, in the alternate reality, SpaceX does not have a rocket that sends people to the moon. They instead have made this amazing video game service that everyone has bought into because it's so groundbreaking.
Dude, if they were to do something like that, they're already like they're the only company that I'm aware of that's a private company that's like doing stuff in space. Like if they were to like set up something like that, like a satellite network, like satellite internet basically, then yeah, that's how they would fuel their trip to Mars, or that's how they would fund their trip to Mars, pretty much.
Yep.
Well, cool. Then mine is something that I told you. I was joking with you earlier, which is what inspired this DLC. Which is in hypothetical. So that's what Termite just talked about was Earth T for Termite. In Earth P, another parallel universe, Sony comes out for the E3 because in Earth P, we handled the coronavirus just fine. There was China took care of it. It was cool because China's cool in Earth P. And our president at the time of Earth P was like, yeah, we made sure to take care of things. So it never even really reached the shores and was handled by China. Only a handful of people. It was like SARS. So in Earth P, they have E3 and Sony is a part of it because Sony plays nice in Earth P. And on Earth P, Sony comes out on the stage for E3 and says, we would like to unveil our new console. And then, bam, Reggie Fils-Aimé walks on the stage. He did not. Ooh. He has not retired from Nintendo on Earth P. And he goes, we want to announce for the first time in 25 years, we have reconciled our differences from way back then. And we are finally ready to announce and unleash the Sony Nintendo PlayStation.
That is insane because I literally had that thought and I switched to SpaceX. Nice. No joke. I am not lying to you. I said the Sony Nintendo partnership. The only difference between my thought and what you just said is that it never ended. Like it was successful and they started with the original PlayStation in Nintendo. So instead of a PlayStation 5, we do have a PlayStation 5, but it's the Nintendo
PlayStation 5, yeah.
Yes. And that is insane that you had that exact same thought.
In mine, they reconcile, and now this thing is, again, it's got all of the Nintendo IPs, but it's got the it is a home console of the caliber of the PlayStation 5. So, and they announce a shared exclusive system, like Xbox Game Pass, except it's got a library of Sony and Nintendo exclusives from all throughout history, and you can subscribe to it. Boom, that's it. Nintendo, Sony, PlayStation, and then they come up to and then right before they walk off stage, they go $2.99.
Yes, yep, that's it. There it is.
That's it.
They won the video game industry single-handedly.
Boom. Earth P has just imploded on itself, and it's done.
And a launch title is a complete remake of Ocarina of Time in the graphics of what we saw for Ratchet and Clank.
Oh yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yep. With the same art style, but ridiculously detailed.
Yeah. So that is.
You can oh my gosh, could you imagine like a Link to the Past style Dark World, Light World, but Ocarina of Time 3D open world with like the Breath of the Wild engine,
yeah.
And like the streaming technology they showed in the Ratchet and Clank, but it's like you're warping through time and you can like reach into the Dark World like now and do stuff and like bounce back and forth. That would be amazing.
So now let's build our machine that will allow us to invade other parallel universes. We'll go find Earth P and get ourselves a Sony Nintendo PlayStation.
Yes.
All right, that's DLC then.
Ming, ming, ming.
Fantastic. So great. Let's move on to our main topic now. So as we said on the onset, we are talking about the Graphical Plateau, which is we'll get into terminology. Let's go right into terminology. What is the Graphical Plateau? But before, let's lay down some other terminology that'll be important, and we'll lay the foundation. So we'll start with things like what are graphics. We'll talk about photorealism, and then we'll ultimately cap it off with the Graphical Plateau. So I have a list here that I wrote down as kind of some basic terms that will be helpful to define as we go into this. You might have ones you want to add. So if anything comes to mind, like a term that you might find we will be using that you want to go ahead and define. There's a couple later as well, but these are the ones that we'll be dealing with on the onset. So, so first I want to talk about graphics. What are graphics? If we're talking about the graphical plateau, what are graphics to start with?
Funnily enough that you had to define this, and I'm glad you did, because there was a point in my childhood when someone used the term graphics from like a printing perspective, and they're like, "Oh, we need these graphics printed," and I was like, "What?
What?
This banner is called graphics?" It was like my mind exploded. So graphics in video games, because I was a kid playing video games nonstop, and the only time I ever heard the term graphics was in the context of video games, is the umbrella term for the game's visuals.
Right.
And
so it's
8-bit, 16-bit, 64-bit. Those were the graphics of the time. Super Nintendo, Nintendo, and
totally. And those have to do with like processing instructions, which again are important for graphics, but as graphics got more sophisticated and as we got into the 3D realm, then we would start to hear words that we're going to now define, such as resolution and frame rate, which are important to graphics, especially as you get more advanced into the 3D space. So what is resolution? We've talked about this before on an episode way long time ago when we were actually talking about frames per second.
It is how many individual pixels can be rendered on screen per square inch.
Yep,
and interestingly enough, the resolution is usually a number, a single number, representing how many pixels are across a horizontal line.
Oh,
gotcha. Or is it a vertical line? It's one of the two. Like 4K, if you look up like 4K resolution, it's actually
like 4,000 from one end to the other from the width of the.
It is 2160, or it's 3,840 by 2160 is 4K. So it's a box, right? It's a rectangle. So it's 3,840 pixels by 2,160 pixels. But they say, 3,840 rounds up to 4,000.
4,000.
So we'll just call
4K.
it 4,000, but it's only one axis.
That does sound better than 3,400,
right.
blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Well, cool. Yeah, no, I didn't know that. But it's basically per, like, again, if you were to draw a vertical line, or if you draw a horizontal line through the middle of your monitor, and then a vertical line through the other middle, the top middle, the y-axis, x-axis, I don't remember which one's which. It doesn't matter. If there was a cross on a little T in the middle of your monitor, that is the number by number. So in the case of 4K, it's that 3,000 across, and then what did you say? 2,000 down.
2,160. Yep.
2,160. Yeah. Cool. So it's basically just like how detailed an image can get, because at the end of the day, we're talking about pixels. At the end of the day, all that graphics are little tiny colored dots. And so the individual unit of those is called a pixel. But it's the same idea as my understanding of graphics is like, you remember those like mosaic images where it's like they take they take your school. Like they take all the photos of everybody in your class, in your school, and then they make a picture out of it, a bigger picture out of it. That's the same thing as what a pixel, like what pixels are, and what graphics ultimately are. Is it's all the little tiny single color dots. So all the red dots come together to form the blood on the character's sword. All the gray dots form the sword, and so it's really just like a giant puzzle of these individual, and that's what pixels are. So we want to define those as well.
A tip of frustration for me is that 1080p, which is HD, is a reference to the vertical count of pixels, because it's actually 1920 by 1080. For 4K, they're like, 4 times as much, but not really. And we'll switch which reference we'll have to the horizontal count to 3840, because they want to call it 4K.
Yeah.
So because of marketing and PR, 4K or 1080p times 4 is actually like 4,000. Like 320, and that's not even a resolution, but they wanted to. It's close. It's rounded anyway. That's just
realistic. Well, that's helpful because realistically, then 1080 is or 4K is only about twice as much as
2160 exactly.
Yep. So,
but they don't want to say that. They want to say 4K and 4 times as much.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. So then when you are rendering graphics, you have to have a certain amount of computing power, because you have to be able to put X amount of pixels or polygons, if you will. The computer has to be able to draw and render those, and they can only draw and render a certain amount at a time. So the unit that computes that is called flops, which stands for floating point operations per second. So why it's not flopops, flopops or something. I don't know. They look to the
floating points all like abbreviated to FL.
To
and
FL,
operations
yeah,
per second is
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So flops is so that you'll hear the term teraflops. That's what we're kind of up to right now in regards to computing power. So that's like something like 10 to the 12th power. I think 10 with 12 zeros behind it, I think is a teraflop.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yep. So that's a lot. That's a lot of flops.
It is. And it's calculated based on how many single processing units, SPUs. So, for example, the PlayStation 5 has like 36, I believe. It's a number I just pulled. I'm not looking at it. But you take the number of single processor units and you multiply it by the clock speed. Because it's like how many instructions can happen per second, and the clock speed is how many cycles happen per second. So if you have like a 3.8 gigahertz processor, 3.8 thousand processes happen in 1 single second. Well, if you can do 3,800 cycles in 1 second, but you have like 50 single processors, you can command 50 different units to do 3,800 cycles in 1 second, and that's how you come up with floating operation points.
Awesome.
Floating point operations. Yeah.
Fantastic. So if video games were just paintings and all you had to do is render a still image, we will have reached the graphical plateau and then some at this point, which is counterintuitive to what the graphical plateau is, but it doesn't matter. We would have reached it. It would have been great. The problem is video games have to move. Just like movies, we have to be able to make them go from point A to point B and tell a story, right? And have different images up on the screen constantly in order to simulate motion. And so that's where frame rate comes in, also referred to as frames per second, FPS, if you will. And yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's how many image frames can display per second to create the illusion of motion. When you actually think of what motion is in reality, this makes sense because all that what our brain interprets as motion is just light reflecting off of a surface. And then a fraction of a second later, that light is reflecting off of a surface that has moved slightly, or you've moved slightly, and so it's now coming at a different angle. So your mind is interpreting frames, what we would call frames in a video game, what would be individual still images, and so that's what frame rate is in video games. It's
derived from like the film and TV, right? They had film reels, and it was just like a camera that takes pictures ridiculously quick as you act in front of the camera, and they would record you, and then you would have a film strip with all the different frames, and you would literally cut the ribbon of the frames you want to remove and then reattach what you want to keep to edit, and then you would play them through a projector, and 24 frames per second is actually the standardized rate for film and TV, with the exception of the Hobbit films, which tried to do the weird like 45 and everyone hated it. 48. I think they tried to double that, but so that's the frame rate. It's like a flip book of small art, but think of that as like exponentially like compounded in advanced calculations when it comes to triangles and polygons and lights, shadows, volumetric occlusion. That's like how if you have smoke and you render smoke, like light behaves differently in smoke than it does through water, than it does through the air. And so like you have all these different types of like other calculations that need to happen, all this crazy advanced geometry. And that's where flops and frame rate kind of converge with like the resolution, because now you have the textures need to look sharper. There needs to be more polygons and more triangles rendered at the same time. And all of that has to be animated in a way, and lights reflected on it, whether it's nighttime, daytime, and then you have rain and you have like reflections, and whether it's wet, dry, it's like all this stuff comes together to create an image that moves and it looks realistic.
Yes, and the goal, and so that's a great segue, because the goal, all this, like you said, all this comes together, combines. There's all kinds of different technologies that you're talking about that aid in merging the frame rate and the resolution and pulling those teraflops and all that stuff. All of it is to create, not in all cases, because there are some games that are heavily stylized, but the goal is to get to what a term that is called photo-realism. And that is how close a computer-generated image can appear to look true to real life. Photorealism is not a term exclusive to computer-generated graphics. When I looked it up, actually was a movement among painters. They were trying to paint a picture that looked like a photograph, basically, that looked like reality.
That would be so hard.
Yeah, I've seen paintings that are close, though. Like if you look at the art subreddit, like if you go to r/art, like every once in a while you'll see a painting that you're like, that's a photo. There's no way. So they're getting close. But you can, again, when it refers to graphics, it is basically like does this look real? How, like, real, like look this real in the same way that a photograph looks real, which isn't even necessarily like you can make, like, photos have limitations too. Like photographs have limitations too. If you look at photos taken back in like the 90s, or like even photos in your phone are using the same process as computers are, like computer graphics are, like they're rendering it based on pixels and stuff like that. So like even it's like photograph technology isn't really what your eye sees. Although it, the top of the line, best cameras, printed on, the best materials that capture photos, like those are closer than computers are to rendering images. But the goal is to render an image the same way that your brain does, basically. And that's what photorealism is. And again, this finally leads us to, if we reach photorealism, then for all intents and purposes, we have reached the graphical plateau, which is a term that just refers to the point at which a computer-generated visual can no longer improve due to the limitations of human vision and the human brain's interpretation of vision.
Yep.
And that's, again, the word plateau, if you're familiar with what a plateau is, it's a rock formation that gets flat on the top. So it goes up and up and up and up and up, and then it gets flat. It doesn't go higher. So that image meant to, again, in this case, is like if you were to take a graph and say, wow, these graphics, like we're talking like Pong graphics, looks nothing like ping pong. But then they've gotten better and better and better, going up and up and up and up and up. And sometimes they get steeper and sometimes they make huge jumps, but then it gets to a certain point and it just can't get better. And that's where that's what this entire episode's about. 38 minutes into the episode,
plateau.
We're talking about that plateau. And so, we'll talk about like why this plateau is important. What does it mean for gaming if we reach it? And we're going to talk about how we're closer to that plateau than we've ever been before. So cool. Whew, exhausting. Just terminology. So before we get too far into the plateau, though, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit, as much as we can, as much as research is out there for this. But I wanted to talk about actually how human vision has everything to do with this. Because again, all of this is just everyone's experience is just what they perceive, right? So how does human vision interact with computer-generated images? And is there a limit to what the human brain can process regarding things like resolutions and frame rates? Because these are important, because once we hit, if there are limits, then we know not to waste our time trying to go beyond those limits without expanding the human brain. So, cool. So how does when it comes to playing a video game, how does your brain work as it's interacting with that stuff?
I don't know super technical answers, and I see some notes.
We can give the layman.
The frame rate, I know there is no, I mean, you put there's no agreement on the max frame rate that can possibly be rendered that a human can even notice, but they suspect around 200 FPS, 200 frames per second. So if you display 200 images in 1 second and run it by a human, you're not going to be able to pick out the difference between that and 500 frames per second.
Yeah,
like it's just going to look exactly the same because your brain can't keep up. So it's just how much your eyes can handle. Like it's like real life. You're like if you run your hand in front of your face and you can't see your fingers, all you see is a blur, and that's because the frame rate is so real. It's real life. Like to mimic that in a video game, I guess 200 frames per second would produce the same results. I'm assuming.
Right, and the reason there's no agreement is because part of this is fairly subjective. Like, you can actually train your brain to see frame rates. Like, you can train your brain to perceive frame rates better, if that makes sense. And they actually say one of the best ways to do it is by playing video games, like playing action games that require very quick responsive time, and your brain's going to be able to do a better job of picking out frame rates and knowing where that slight lag and difference means the difference between life and death. One of the other professions that are great at picking out frame rates are pilots, because they have to be able to make split second. They're very intimately familiar with motion and how motion affects their vision. Kind of comes with the job. So because of that, it's hard. It's a hard thing to test. If you're getting like the Air Force's top of the line flying aces, they're going to be able to test frame rate a lot higher than someone who their entire life has just been spent reading books and watching movies at 24 frames per second. They're not going to have that training, essentially brain training to do that. So there's, again, they think the upper limit's somewhere around 200, but it's not something that's been widely tested. But in regards to resolution, the human, I read this, and this is something that, again, it's a little bit more sciencey than I'm even capable of understanding, but the human eye can process something called 1 arc minute, and then they interpret it, and they said if you're 20 inches away from a screen, you'd be able to see 107 pixels per inch, 170 pixels per inch. So But that's just to demonstrate how like the resolution actually depends on a lot of different factors, and one of those factors is how close to the thing you're looking at are you? Because and this may be obvious, makes sense, but if you're closer to something, you'll be able to pick out all the little tiny details more than if you like take a couple steps back. So, but they say that roughly 20 inches away, the human eye can process no more than 170 pixels per square inch. So
where all of this stuff matters the most, and what you can really come into, if you want to become intimate with what we're talking about, go try a VR headset.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about like the human vision interacting with computer generated images in a way that is realistic. This is why this matters. It's not just having like photorealistic graphics, but that resolution and frame rate, and marrying the two together requires computational power. And that's why a lot of people will complain about like VR being so expensive. You need this crazy gaming machine to do it. Well, that's because people are getting sick, or like the images look off, like something is weird about them. But like to really nail and drive this home, go try VR. If it's done well,
Right.
which like Half-Life Alyx apparently is like the quintessential amazing experience on VR. Of course, you got to find a friend who's got an expensive computer that has it.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll see that all this stuff kind of makes a lot more sense when you're in a virtual reality world.
Right. And it's also worth talking about the fact that, like, again, the human mind was not like it wasn't designed. It didn't evolve, however you want to put it. It's not meant to do this. Like, it's not meant to see things like this.
Yeah.
Like all of the natural sources of like light, we're not really meant to stare into them for very long.
Yeah.
Like, we're not meant to have light projected into our eyes. The human eyes kind of and brain evolved to see reflected light. So that's what everything else, like, you know, we're seeing the light of the sun as it reflects off of and is like filtered through the pigments on everything that we see. So the idea of like blasting light into our eyes, especially like in a VR headset, is gonna, like we've found, it screws with the brain a little bit. So that's why actually trying to reach photorealism is actually it's trying to meet the brain at its limitations, you know what I mean? So because if you can simulate, if you can take light and use it, blast it into someone's eyes, but at a way that simulates the way the light reflects, then it'll make a huge difference in the way that the brain's like, I'm okay with this. So okay, so why talk about this? Why is the graphical plateau such a big deal? What happens if we reach it, and in what ways is the plateau good or bad for games? So it's kind of like three questions squished into one.
It's it's all boiled around this one idea that I'm going to try and flesh out. So all three questions. As a kid, or even like a consumer, even a casual gamer, one of the biggest, most exciting things about a next generation console coming out is how much better are the graphics going to be. Mm-hmm. And this is because we've been trained from the Nintendo era, 8-bit, to the 16-bit era. You've doubled the ability to render a sprite. You know, and it looks so much better. You can do so much more with double the amount. And then we moved into the 3D era with like polygons and animation and motion. And there were these huge leaps in graphics. And so every time a new console would come out, we were just blown away by how much cooler and better it looked. And we've continued this trend. And
yeah, graphics alone could sell a game. The graphics alone could, you know, this game looks so good. Okay, I'm going to go play it. Yeah. Many of the games that you remember loving and playing, I think I'm pretty confident in saying they were actually not great games. Like the actual moment-to-moment gameplay was not great, but because they looked so good for their time, they were the creme de la creme. They were the cream of the crop. So that's just, I was just wanting to...
There's a derogatory term that we'll keep off of this podcast because we are family-friendly, but it has to do with prostitution and graphics, and we'll leave it at that. Existed in the nomenclature.
Wow,
What?
Nothing. I can't even. There's like the way you said it, just it's awesome. Fine. I think everybody knows what you mean. Knows what you mean.
And I said derogatory. Anyway, people are chasing the graphics, right? It's all about the graphics. Mm-hmm. Does the game look good? Are the graphics good? No. If not, it sucks. And I've heard the most ignorant arguments saying that the Nintendo Wii is a trash console because it doesn't have an HDMI cord and it's not high definition, when the consoles next to it, the PS3 and the Xbox 360, are. And so because the Wii has subpar non-HD graphics, it sucks.
Arguably, I would make the argument we were all graphics bad girls, if you will, for a long time. I can say I was, just because again, that was the mark of a good game, right? At the time, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like was how does it look? And I mean, there was still wiggle room. I would still say, you know, I wouldn't have been like, well, because Mario does not look photorealistic, it's not a good game. I would have said Mario is a great game, and I'm fine with the way it's stylized. But yeah, I don't know. I think there is something to be said about, like, you know, I think as the 2000s, as those aughts kind of went on, and games started to experiment more with like what does make a good game and gameplay.
Exactly. So you're getting to the answer of my question. And so, like, using the Wii as an example, a console with objectively bad graphics compared to the rest, if you look at resolutions and frame rates and what they were doing, Mario Galaxy 2 could be, people can make a strong argument that that's the best Mario game ever made. And it's on a console from 2006, I'm sorry, from November 2006 is when the Wii came out. And we are now 14 years later, and we have advanced like exponentially in graphical performance. But Mario Galaxy 2 is completely timeless and absolutely incredible and worth playing even today. And so the answer to that question is, why is the graphical plateau a big deal? What happens when we reach it? And in what ways is it good or bad? It actually, like, the graphical plateau, when we hit it, is actually going to weed the bad developers from the good, because they can no longer rely on something that is so visual. They now have to innovate in new ways to make the gameplay experience and the gameplay mechanics and the things that make up a video game. Because to me, graphics have always been the icing on the cake. Is it a good game? Does it play well? Does it meet the direction the artists want? Does it tell a good story? Does it convey what you want? Okay, that's great. Now, how does it look? Like, once you check all those boxes, it's like, what's the graph? And now we're seeing new innovations, and this is a good thing when we hit this plateau. This is one of the things that make the plateau awesome, is we're seeing new styles, new stylistic innovations. You watch the PlayStation 5 unveiling, and I struggled to articulate in words every single game, because they had such unique art styles that I don't even have words in my vocabulary to explain the difference between. And it was awesome and fascinating. And I think that is what is going to, like, that's why the graphical plateau is awesome, but it is such a big deal because we are seeing it, and it is affecting the next generation right now, and it's not even started yet. Right.
We're seeing it play out. Again, we're seeing it play out live. You know, we talked a little bit about this on our on the PS5, the bonus episode we did, and we've talked about it, again, we've hit on it pretty recently a lot, because again, we are closer to the graphical plateau we've ever been before. The difference between the graphics on the PlayStation 4 and the difference between the graphics on the PlayStation 5 are the smallest leap they've ever been since. And you know, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to trash the PlayStation 5. It's still impressive, but when you compare, like, the leap from the 3 to the 4, the leap from the 2 to the 3, the leap from the 1 to the 2,
we'll get there. We got some numbers to crunch.
Yeah, that's fine. But when you look at those leaps, like, the earlier ones are so big. We jump from, 32-bit processing to 64. We're in through the world of 3D now. And then from 3D, like, now we're able to render, realistic image capturing, people and facial expressions, stuff like that. So again, it's just been getting better and better and better. But now, like, those jumps are smaller. And so now what we're seeing, and what we're seeing play out here in this generation, this next generation that's coming up, we're now seeing that developers, like you said, have to rely on new things, and the console makers have to rely on new draws to sell consoles, because you can't just say it looks better. You have to, now what we're seeing is, now we're seeing the whole speed. Now we're in the realm of, now this generation will be defined, I think I said, by speed, like the ability to pull information quickly, no load screens, rendering full 3D environments within seconds of stepping out the door, if you will. Your character being able to live render environments because it's able to pull from a hard drive that's got a quicker means of transferring data. That's going to be the next, that's the real next jump of the next generation. So yeah, I think that in that regard, the plateau is a good thing, because if we reach it, then like you said, gameplay, the innovations will start to come in the form of gameplay. The innovations will start to come in the form of style. What can you do with this hardware, not just make it look good? Because anybody can now make it look good.
And I like that specifically, you mentioned the solid state hard drives. That's between both the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. As we've seen for, like, third-party developers, they're going to be able to put games on both, and it'll be fine. It'll work. But what's interesting is, like, Sony even took another step, and they're like, let's rethink how we do audio. And they have this new, like, 3D audio engine and hardware in the box that does this stuff where, like, they've looked at these individual hearing earlobe shapes and, like, graphed your ability to hear different frequencies and whatnot. Like, I don't even begin to know the science, but Mark Cerny went into detail about it. And apparently, like, the headset that you can get, you can choose a profile that meets Like they ask you questions and assess you, and you pick a profile that meets your needs. So the game is actually outputting a different sound, and it's 3D audio. So it's all like positional and based on what's going on. But what the game is producing is specific to you because you've chosen a profile that like matches you. It sounds insane, and it's all new technology, and it's just a different way to immerse you in the game. And it's a whole different like thing I've never really thought of or even thought we needed. And it could just be like, you know, PR dumb stuff like 3D was back in the PS3 days when you had the 3D TVs with the 3D glasses, and like that was just silly.
Yeah.
You know, it could go that way, but it's cool that someone is thinking of something different. And the reason we're thinking of things that are different is because graphics can't get that much better.
Yep.
And it's good. Do you see anything bad about the graphical plateau?
The only thing
so
I was going to segue into that. The only thing I can think of that's bad about the graphical plateau is simply a PR issue. You know what I mean? Like console, and I think we have also seen this play out. You could tell at the PS5 unveiling that they had to pick and choose very specific games to show off and feature and highlight that show how the speed and the rendering can be used to actually to change gameplay. You know what I mean? Because because you can't show that. You can't show... Right. I mean, they could. I mean, if they wanted to, they what they should have done is demonstrated the Spider-Man. Like they should have taken a game that everybody already knows, like Spider-Man, like they talked about, and shown how there's no load screens. They should have said,
I don't know
remember
why
how
that's
these
not a
load
public
screens?"
Thing.
Yeah, they should have totally shown that off. They should have shown how they could have made Spider-Man move so much faster because they could render things fast. You know what I mean? Like even if it looked comical, seeing him like rocket through, you know, Manhattan, it would have been like, you can get from one end of the island to the other in like 10 seconds. Like, and it can render it fully. Like they should have shown that off. Even if it looked comical, it would have been awesome because people are familiar with that.
Right.
Or take a game like Anthem where like it's got notoriously bad load screens to be like boop, 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 you know, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. And just like, that would have been, that to me, that's like, there are ways they could have shown it off. And so that's what I mean. Like, the graphical plateau is quote unquote bad for games in the sense that it's so hard to like, because for a generation that has been raised on graphics, and for I'm not talking about you and me because we have this is going to sound super, super arrogant, but we do kind of have a sophisticated understanding of these things. For the average gamer, they're going to want to just be like, I want it to look good. You know what I mean? Like I want, and
it
that's
doesn't
what
sound
sells.
as bad as you think. Like you and I are in the gaming industry. We do this podcast. We're in, it's like what we do. The casual gamers never really cared about graphics, even in the back. Like you think of Metal Gear Solid 4, if that would have been a PS2 game, it would have made just as much money. It would have been so regarded as reduce the graphics and push the game out on the previous gen. That's just one example. You look at like Gears of War. If you'd have downscaled that and set it out on the original Xbox, like it would have sold just as many copies. The game was amazing. Like mechanically, it was fine. And the biggest difference between them was graphical fidelity. And like people loved the graphics. They loved to see that. And those were the selling points.
Maybe I'm just selling it short, like selling my fellow gamers short, and I don't intend to do so. I do think that a lot more people... You're doing
the opposite, but okay.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think a lot more people, though, maybe to your point, a lot more people are, like, getting more comfortable with these kinds of things. I know what broke me of my graphical snob habits was having a PC for the first time and being like, I've got to pay for this all myself. And now the choices I make in purchasing make a difference. And I see my friends who are able to play World of Warcraft on all the settings maxed out, and it looks gorgeous, but I still want to play the freaking game. And you know what? At the end of the day, I'm just happy to be playing the freaking game, even if I'm sitting there on like low on everything and no ambient occlusion and no blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's what kind of broke me of it. So I imagine many of my fellow gamers have kind of gotten there as well, where it's like, yeah, we're not all spoiled little middle-class suburban kids anymore with parents buying our hardware. So some of us have been like, hey, you know what? I'm willing to sacrifice graphical fidelity just to play the games, just to be happy with the games. So, I think that we're getting there, but I do still think there's maybe it's a vocal minority, but I think there's a loud subsection of graphic snobs that are still in existence that will just blast everything. And, there's you got people being like, well, the PS5 has fewer teraflops than the Xbox Series X, so I'm obviously going to get an Xbox Series X on specs alone. And then you have the PC gamers who are like, screw you guys, we'll be able to build a better PC in a year anyways. It's like, come on, guys. Like, that's not, to me, that's not nearly as important. But again, I think the plateau is starting to highlight, the fact that we're reaching the plateau is starting to highlight these issues where people have to get more granular about what is and is not good graphics, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. But Well, cool.
Nailed
Did
it.
you have any final thoughts that you wanted to add to that? Like, I think I interrupted you is the only reason.
Oh, you're fine. I was going to say the gap between what PC gaming has been doing and what consoles is doing narrow. It gets more narrow every single generation. And I use like Counter-Strike, for example, as a perfect example of this. The version of Counter-Strike on the original Xbox was trash. And it was a completely different game. Like everything looked different. The UI was different. It was on a separate platform entirely. Yet the hardware was similar because that was the thing about the Xbox was it used DirectX and it was like similar to a PC, but it was like downscaled. And then you look at like Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast came out on the Xbox, but it also was on PC. And you could throw like really good graphics cards at it, but at its core, it was exactly the same game. It just looked like a little bit different. And then you fast forward to like the PS3 and the Xbox 360 generation, and we were getting ports from console to PC for the first time. Like in mass, like most video game studios developed games to run on the PS3 and the Xbox 360 because there were more of them in the wild and they wanted to make money. They could sell more copies by that. So the games would then get ported to PC. They would look pretty, but when you get to the point of like a $500 graphics card and a $400 graphics card running next to each other, the game is the same. And like you have to pause and zoom in like 400% to see a difference. And fast forward to the PS4 and the Xbox One X, Xbox One generation, this gen, and you'll see like I played Battlefield 4 on the PlayStation because it looked better than my computer could run it, and it made sense. Like it worked. It was a box and it worked. And so the difference between PC capabilities and console capabilities is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And now we're entering a new phase where the implementation of the solid states and their speeds far surpass anything that's possible on PC. Even if you were to go out and buy the exact same hardware and play the games, the PlayStation 5 would play them better because it has
if you don't understand that, if you're sitting there being like, what? Yeah, exactly. I was gonna highlight the fact that the way they've put it in, like, because they can sell the box straight out, they don't have to be like, well, this person might buy a solid state drive from us, but they might buy a GPU from AMD or whatever. Like, they can't just put them together. They have to sell them separately as individual components. Whereas with a console, they're like, here, it's right in the box. What they've done is they've implemented the solid state drive as a part of the motherboard of the machine. It's like slapped right in there.
It's built into the architecture between the graphics processor, the RAM, and the CPU, and all of its cores. Like it's in there
to the point where they've said like you won't be able to play games unless you've installed them on the onboard solid state drive. I'm not sure how that's going to work with the expansion. With the storage expansion, like, are they gonna have like a difference? Be like, if you want to play the game with the best experience, you're going to need it on the internal drive, but you can still store games on the external drive. I don't know how that's going to work. They're going to need to explain more of that, but they have said that like, if you want these games to run the way that we intend them to run, they have to be installed on the solid state drive that's soldered into the motherboard, basically. So
and that's exactly the point. And so now we're at the point, like you mentioned it. What teed me off on this entire tangent was when you said, "Oh, I'll be able to build a better computer in a year." Bingo. That's never been the case. Whenever a video game console comes out, it has always been outdated by PCs on launch day all the time. This will be the first time in video game history that a console comes out that's actually better than gaming PCs in some regards. And the point is, the developers are making games. There's nothing that leverages PC more than consoles. And I will narrow that thought down. I will not paint a general stroke on that because there are PC exclusive games that will do that. Most studios, developers, and publishers want to make money. And to do so, they need to have their game on as many platforms as absolutely possible. And so they're going to make games that run on the consoles and PC. What I mean is, if you have Battlefield 6, has not been announced yet, or the Star Wars Squadrons game. It's going to be on everything. It's like cross-platform, right? They're going to make it the same game on all the platforms. And if you have this $8,000 PC gaming rig, it's only going to look so pretty, but it's the same game. There's nothing actually different about them. In fact, you can play together online. They said that, like, cross-play is going to happen. And so this graphical plateau is now removing the parity between these different platforms. And it's actually promoting things like crossplay in new ways. And the whole like cloud computing and streaming and all those things are now happening. And so like that's another example of this graphical plateau and how things have changed over the last I mean, this is only like, what, 15 years?
Yeah, no, it's been tiny amount of time, all things considered.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yep. All right. Well, then we've talked about what the graphical plateau is. We've talked about what are its limits, and we've talked about why it's important. We're not there yet, obviously. What are some of the obstacles or technical hurdles that are in the way of reaching the plateau and achieving, quote, photorealism?
I had to look this up because you put Uncanny Valley.
I did.
And I didn't know what that was. I thought it was
Why don't you tell people? Why don't you look at it? Why don't you tell people what you found out?
Uncanny Valley is actually like this weird pseudoscience where they've graphed the perception of what is real life and what
it's not pseudoscience, human. It's actual science. Sorry. Pseudoscience is the thing. Pseudoscience is like UFO science.
No, it's
the Uncanny Valley has been actually studied.
I call it pseudoscience because there's no like firm way to graph a person's interpretation and reaction to things. And that's what I meant by pseudoscience. It's not like numerical, quantifiable. It's
I get what you mean.
Quantitative.
But and pseudoscience is an actual thing, and this is actual science for people who care about the difference there.
Gotcha. So, all right. Yeah, I'm not trying to talk about like Scientology and UFOs and myths. Like, this is actual studies. IEEE has like I googled Uncanny Valley, and the first thing that came up was the IEEE, which is an organization about computing and programming and standards and all these things. So anyway, it's this like graph that as graphical fidelity, or like in this case, it was like machines and androids. Like you can make an android or a robot appear more realistic, and it becomes like more relatable to a human being. And then eventually it becomes like off, and it's really strange. And like, there's something weird about it, almost freaky, and it bothers you to your core. You can't really explain it. And then it gets really, really bad. And then eventually it gets amazing. And it's like they have actually achieved the photorealism. And in this case, what I read was about robots and their emotion conveyance with their eyes and like their reactions and how they look.
Yeah, the Uncanny Valley is specific to like things that look like humans. And if you, again, the reason it's called the Uncanny Valley, the reason it's called the valley is because if you were to graph it, kind of similar to the plateau, it has very similar definition to what we call the graphical plateau. But with the Uncanny Valley, if you're like, okay, they have created an image of a person, or in the case of androids and robots, they've like built a robot, and the robot looks nothing like a human. It's got like a dog shape. It's going to be at the bottom of like our comfort level, where we're like, we might be like, oh, it's okay. I'm not offended by this thing because it's not a human. It's not trying to be a human, but it's still like, it's not at our like comfort level of, oh, I'm comforted by this as a human. The more it starts to look like a person, you give it hands and legs now. You're like, oh, it's a little person robot. And you start to get more and more comfortable with it. That goes up and up and up. You give it a face that can, make funny faces or emojis or whatever. And we're like, yeah, it's more and more human. Yay, we're happy with it. We're comfortable with it. Then you start doing things like putting skin on it and giving it little facial muscles that render expressions. And you give it eyes. You give it, like realistic looking eyes, and you cover it. And again, you cover it in skin. You put it in clothes. And again, you'd think that following the trend that we get more and more comfortable with it, but there's a point on the graph where it suddenly dips down to the point where we are as unnerved by the simulacrum of a human that is before us, that we're as unnerved as we are with the like dog looking one. And we're like, that's not a person. And it has something to do with the way that we have like evolved to be comfortable with like bodies. Like when a person died, they think that it was a mechanism that helped us avoid corpses, like to not interact with, like to take corpses and be like, it looks like a person because it was a person, but there's something missing. There's something that's gone from it. It's not a human. It's a thing now. And that's why we get rid of corpses and we don't like still hang out with them. Hey, it's my mom, like, because then that would
Bernie's going on over here.
So it makes us sick. Again, it makes us almost revolted because it's meant to, because we're meant to get rid of the bodies so that they don't spread diseases. So they think that's where the Uncanny Valley comes from. And again, it's a valley because if you get past the Uncanny Valley and suddenly once the robot or graphic or whatever gets realistic enough, then suddenly we're comfortable with it as if it were a person. And then it goes all the way up to match the same level. Eventually it goes all the way up to match the same level as a person that we're comfortable with, like talking with your mom, talking with a person, talking with a friend. And that's what the Uncanny Valley is. But it's an obstacle in this case because you can actually see it play out in a lot of games right now, where I think of one of my favorite examples is Horizon Zero Dawn. Amazing, wonderful game. But when like Aloy is just staring into the camera and you're waiting to give her like a command to say something, there's just something off about the way she looks like a person, but not like there's no soul there. You know what I mean? And it's better when she's like talking and interacting with other characters because she's feeding like the character, the way it's rendered is feeding off the energy of the other characters in the world. It's as soon as you stop interacting and let it kind of sit there that it's just like staring into some soulless being. The way that Guerrilla Games rendered teeth in that game too was also incredibly unnerving to me. But
see, I was thinking the same thing about Death Stranding.
Yeah.
Mama
so we
and
have
her teeth. I was like, oh
my gosh, yeah. So we have to get past the uncanny valley before in the way that we render human beings, because again, most games, you know, again, if we're trying to get realism, we have to realistically render people, and in order to do that, we have to get past the uncanny valley because people are just going to always be video game characters look just human enough, but we still haven't kind of really breached the uncanny valley in all circumstances. In some cases, I'm like, yeah, I'm in. I love Aloy. In other cases, I'm like, something's wrong with you. Why aren't you don't have a soul, do you?
And I love your example of like older games too. You said Mass Effect had some weird animations in the middle of their talking and expressions that just seemed off. And there's a lot of memes and stuff online of some ridiculousness. I know there's some older Assassin's Creed games that have like weird facial animations and almost wonkiness that make you feel uncomfortable. And that was kind of the bottom of the valley, if you will. And now with modern technology, we're kind of on the uptick and we see little pockets of it occasionally, but that's only going to get better.
Well, you had a great quote that you pulled from Tim Sweeney regarding rendering people and rendering humans and why this is such an obstacle, why we'll never really be able to reach the top of the plateau until we can figure this out. And so I wanted
I'm going to read this. This is all Tim Sweeney's words. He was the one that showed off Unreal 5. He is the CEO and founder of Epic Games, and he works on the Unreal Engine and Fortnite. He's like one of the richest people in video games, period, but he's also ridiculously smart. So here's what he had to say. Having dynamic human responses in games are reactive to what you are doing and aren't just pre-baked. As you are interacting with a real human, their eyes are constantly moving with you. The eye contact is super important. You're picking up the emotions on their faces and they're dynamically responding to you. If you just used a perfect motion captured human, a flawless motion capture with future technology, it would still be uncanny and not feel like it's a real human being interacting with you. To do completely photorealistic rendering of everything, you have to simulate realistic humans and actually simulate human intelligence, emotion, and thinking. It's not a matter of computing power. If you gave us an infinitely fast computer, we still don't have the algorithm. We have no real clue how the brain works at higher levels. You might understand how one neuron interacts with adjoining neurons, but the large-scale structure of it is still a complete mystery. That could be unpredictably far away. Once we are able to simulate human intelligence, what's going to separate humans from people? You're talking singularity level stuff at that point. But I do think that we are many decades away from having that ability.
Yeah, and the singularity he's referring to is like the artificial intelligence singularity, where artificial intelligence basically, like if you have to create a computer so smart to be able to like accurately respond to human interaction, at that point you've created a computer so smart that it's a person. But in another interview, speaking of Tim Sweeney, in another interview, he talked about, you know, again, though creating photorealistic humans may be just a sheer questionable amount of computing power, he still believes that, you know, if we can reach about 40 teraflops of computing power, then we can at least render photorealistic environments and photorealistic motion.
I have that quote too.
And stuff like that. Yep. Oh, you have the full quote?
I do. He said, we're getting to the point now where we can render photorealistic static scenes without humans with static lighting. Today's hardware can do that. So part of that problem is solved. Getting to the point of photorealistic dynamic environments, especially with very advanced shading models like wet scenes or reflective scenes or anisotropic paint, though maybe 40 teraflops is the level where we can achieve all of that.
Yeah, so 40 teraflops, again, to orient that in where we are now with the current hardware, the next gen consoles are going to be 10 teraflops for the PS5 and 12 teraflops is what they've clocked at for the Xbox Series X right now.
We're a quarter of the way there.
Yeah, we're a quarter of the way there. So again, that is all just, if you remember, flops earlier being that how many polygons you can draw on a screen at a time. They think that when we can render 40 teraflops, then we'll be able to render scenes, environments, and dynamic action photorealistically. We still might not we still might be uncanny with people,
flops. Flops
I'm
render
sorry.
polygons.
Flops render us, yes.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Had that backwards,
When computers can achieve 40 teraflops of power processing, then we'll be able to render polygons in a photorealistic way.
Yeah.
So those are the two major obstacles and technical hurdles that I was able to think of and come up with. I'm sure there's other things that are keeping us from the graphical plateau. But for my final question, this should be a quick one, and then we can let you guys go. Do you think we're going to reach the graphical plateau in our lifetime?
Absolutely. And I'll explain why. We only need 3.33 times more power to get to 40. And where have we come from? In the last 22 years, go all the way back to 1998, the Dreamcast was 1.4 gigaflops. Now, giga is a billion, and tera is a trillion. So it's an order of magnitude in difference. So a Dreamcast was 1.4 gigaflops. The PlayStation 2 was 6 gigaflops. And then we'll just follow Sony, so I don't have to read this whole list. But I mapped out all the consoles. But fast forward to 2006, which was a mere 8 years later. We are at 230 gigaflops, which was 37 times more powerful than the PS2. So they multiplied the processing power by 37 times.
Wow.
Between the PS2 and PS3. Fast forward to 7 years ago, and they've then continued to multiply it, not as much, but 7.9 times for the PS4 at 1.8 teraflops. And then the Pro doubled that to 4.2 teraflops. And now the PlayStation 5 has doubled it yet again, more actually, 2.4 times to the 10.28 teraflops we have today.
Yeah.
So the Xbox Series X being 12 teraflops, so in 22 years, we have multiplied our graphical prowess in the console market space by 8,571.4 times. The Xbox Series X is 8,571 times more powerful than a single Dreamcast. Mm-hmm. So if they can do that in 22 years, I have no doubt that maybe even the half-step consoles, if they come out with a PS5 Pro and an Xbox Series XX, then yes, I dropped that
Xbox
joke.
Series XX, that's great. I love it.
Then all you need to do is multiply them by 3.33 and you've got 40. That's it. That's what we will see that in our lifetime.
Yeah, I think so. I think we will definitely see the 40 teraflops in our lifetime. In regards to whether or not we'll be able to photorealistically render like people, I mean, I don't know. They're doing some really fascinating stuff with neural nets and AI in the AI space. So hopefully the AI emerge and don't want to kill us all, and instead help us achieve photorealism. And then, there's even more possibilities. You know what I mean? Like we've talked in episodes before about like at what point, when we are able to like map out the human brain and know what every neuron does, then it opens up possibilities of like, could we enhance what the human mind is capable of processing? Could we insert chips into our brains that allow us to actually see things at 300 frames per second and interpret, 9 billion pixels on a screen or whatever, so who knows? Like,
find out in September when you play Cyberpunk 2077.
Exactly. So, some of that may be beyond our lifetime, but it's technology is moving at a breakneck speed, and it has been for the last like 20 years. So, longer than that. It's been happening since the 80s.
I often wondered if we would ever get to the point of putting the properties of matter in video games, so that liquids and gases and solids and there's different states of different types of materials, different types of metals would have different reflective states and different density and buoyancy and all those things, like adding those molecular properties in video games, if we would ever get that far. I daydream about that kind of stuff because I'm that nerdy.
Well, then there's like that could launch us into a whole conversation about quantum computing. If you can make computers that don't rely solely on electricity, then good gracious, like if they use other physical processes to render things, then we just and again, those experiments are happening. So all of this will just make for better video games when we perfect the technology. So and we're still young, sprightly 30-year-olds. So we've still got a whole like double our lifetime to, and if we saw the jump from flip phones to smartphones just in the aughts, then we'll see some crazy stuff happening, hopefully, in the next 20, 30 years. So cool. Well, that's our show. That is the graphical plateau and why it's important. So please let us know what your thoughts are. Do you think we're close to the graphical plateau? Do you think we're still far away? What are some obstacles that we may have missed? What are some other features and aspects of the graphical plateau that we may have missed? So please reach out to us, engage with us. We want to hear what your thoughts are. We want to hear what your crazy video game announcements are. If you think about what's happening in the parallel universes right now, please tell us your parallel universe announcements. And Termite, where can the Podsmasters of the internet find us if they want to engage with us?
You can engage with us primarily on our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a subreddit. They're all 80-bit Podsmash, 80-bit Podsmash. And you can also find our Discord server. There's a link to it in all of our show notes that are posted across those social media outlets. So find us. That's the best way for you guys to interact with us and provide feedback. That'd be great. We are a weekly show that launches every Monday at midnight. And you can find all of the different platforms for that at 80bitpodsmash.com, where we have links to Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play. I think those are and more. Our RSS feed is there. You can throw your third-party apps can throw the RSS feed there and find it. And let us know what you think. Please leave us a review on iTunes. They help us with the algorithms to bubble us up to the top for discoverability and to expand our audience. So if you haven't left us a review and you'd like to contribute in some way that costs you absolutely nothing except for a few seconds of your time, please go to iTunes and give us a review. And that's where we are. Oh, Twitch.tv/80bit Podsmash every Wednesday at 8. Yes, we live stream, so you can catch us live and interact with us.
Do we live stream? It seems like
Penguin live streams. Yes, Penguin live streams a lot, but you're about to see a lot of Termite soon.
That's true. But yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yep, you're good. That's it.
That's it. All right, cool. Then next week, July 6th, wow, it's going to be right after the 4th of July. We have to do something special for that. Anyways, we don't have a 4th of July themed episode because all countries matter. And instead, we're going to be doing a episode on cutscenes. So, do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you find them annoying? Is that your reward for beating a game? As I get to see the final cutscene? We're going to be talking about all that next week.
Yes. So see you next week.